Will you join with me in prayer? From your word, O God, speak to our hearts and our minds. Speak to our lives, that we may hear your word afresh. Amen. This is one of those sermons that started and stopped several times over the course of the week. And finally, middle of the afternoon on Saturday, I realized what my problem was. The first problem was that when you talk about poverty, we generally are talking about specific people. They're things that come to our mind immediately. It's the person standing on the street corner, and we're wondering, oh, should I give them money or should I not give them money? What if they're just using it to buy booze? Are they really homeless? Probably not. But are they still needy? Or what do I do? Or you got a college student. Now, when some of us were virtuous and wise and good people, we graduated from college at a time when you borrowed all you could to pay for college because you didn't pay any interest until you'd been out of college for like 6 months, and then it was at an interest rate that was ridiculously low. So you would be earning 6% on your money through your investments, and you'd be paying 2% on your money for your educational loan. So this was a good deal. So you didn't do that. You didn't pay them off until you absolutely had to. But now you have college students who are borrowing at market rates, and the deferred Stafford loans are gone, and they're graduating with $100,000 in debt. And then are saying, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I can't live away from mom and dad because I can't afford, even with a job, I can't afford to live on my own. And so they stay at home and are trapped, trying with this debt load to get out of poverty. We still see people who are living in pockets of poverty, urban ghettos and Appalachian hollahs and many Native American reservations, people who are poor and are trapped in their poverty because there's no good jobs around them. But we also see 50-year-olds who have had good jobs, and then the business got taken over by someone else, and they got laid off, and they discovered that while they had 20 years of experience, they didn't necessarily have the right computer programming languages or the right levels of certification, and they were unemployable. And instead of one really good job that met all your expenses, you had 2 part-time jobs, neither one of which gave benefits. And you suddenly learned that poverty was about yourself. Or when we think about people who are poor, we're thinking about children, because that's about 1/3 of the people who are under the poverty line. Regardless of the circumstances of their parents, they will grow up in reduced opportunities and will go to poorer schools and will have fewer options. And the way forward for them is not one where they can look forward to doing better than their parents, but will struggle just to do as well. The first realization when I was working on a sermon on poverty is that really it's not about them, it's about us. It's about conditions that affect those of us in this congregation. One of the second complication is that there are different perspectives for looking at it. And when we've got disagreements, they almost always come down to these types of presumptions that we bring to the matter. Some of us presume economics, which looks to the processes of a free market to significantly adjust itself so that rational, self-enlightened individuals can make the choices necessary to maximize their self-interest. And on balance, we all do that. So it goes. And if there is poverty, it's a short-term phenomenon and should go away. The key word is free. And since markets are created and are not magic, where there are inefficiencies in the market due to monopolies or government interference or discrimination or poor policies, poverty does result. And here you get 2 voices that lead the charge, and we've heard these. One, Milton Friedman, says The rule is government, just don't do anything because you're going to just mess it up and you're going to make it worse. So no governmental policies. The other calls attention to the ways that government is constantly engaged in how the economy functions and what happens. And it generally is rigged towards people who have the best influence, which means the most money. Joseph Stiglitz is the current champion of this approach. So you got different Nobel Prize winners duking it out as to what's what. And it's political. You know, ooh, do we want to talk about this in church? And some of us say, no. And some of us say, well, yes, of course. A second approach comes from social work or psychology. People adjust to the situations as best they can, and short-term survival always trumps long-term self-interest. The family needs dad to be happy to earn money, so we'll buy him the booze if that keeps him happy. And if he drinks too much of it, well, that's something we'll worry about later. If you are poor, you depend upon your neighbors helping out, which means you can't stand out through education that would make others think you're uppity. We learn behaviors that will keep us alive on the short run and doom us to poverty on the long run. When I was site manager for a shelter for people who are homeless, we had to be really strict on enforcing rules like staying in line and not butting ahead. Our guests knew that the way you kept yourself alive was by cheating a little bit. You got a little more than you were entitled to. And we had to remind them that that's what keeps you poor. And you got to learn to follow the rules or else you're out of here and you're not going to get any help. But in a larger scale, that happens a lot. Part of it is absolutely true. I mean, you got to know how to properly behave. But part of it can also be pretty cruel because we end up blaming people who are poor that it's your fault that you're poor. And we blame the victims of situations rather than the situations themselves. The third approach comes from popular religion, from which is a combination of good and really bad reasons for addressing issues of poverty. It's often held that we ought to help people because we will feel good about doing so. And when the motivation for helping someone else is our feelings, we need to be a little suspicious because it ought to be about helping them and improving their life. If we're doing it for us, we may not care about them. A government example from the 60s, so we're all safe. The US government had a program called Food for Peace, and if there was a starving area in the world, we would ship our surplus grains to that country and give the food away. It was fabulous. It kept American corn prices high. And it's probably a symptom that this was housed not in the State Department, but this was a part of the US Department of Agriculture, because this was about price supports. And what they learned was that when you flooded the market with free food in India, the next year, the farmers didn't plant any food. And the starvation was even worse, because it was about us, not about them. The fourth theory comes from critical theories, which hold that people are poor because they're oppressed, either because they are in the wrong racial and ethnic group, or they live in the wrong places, or simply have the wrong resources to compete in today's economy. And if the problem is oppression, the answer is liberation. And oh, by the way, we've even gotten more political. And each of these positions is political in its own way. Well, which is right? Which seems most appropriate for you? That was my second realization, that our approach to the debate over the problems of poverty are most likely shaped by the approach we take rather than our religious beliefs. It's these basic frames that shape the discussion. Now, churches generally take one of four types of approaches to helping people who are poor. One approach is ignore it. It's not our business. Our job is saving souls. And so when I was at an evangelical pastors group, or earlier in my coming here, I was talking about what our church was doing and the issue of the moment, and the person sitting next to me started the under her breath commentary on how you shouldn't be doing that. We should be going door to doors and converting people and bringing them to Jesus, and that's really all that matters. You shouldn't be doing this food pantry stuff. That's just a waste of your time. It's not your business. And this went on during the entire prayer time. With all due respect, and there's more to that approach than I have time to lay out, that's not us. The second and most popular approach, especially in white churches, is to give some kind of alms. Now, we tend not to give money to people on street corners because you never know how that's being used. But we are big supporters of Soup Kettle or the food pantry or Food for Greater Elgin or PADS or anything that is organized to help people. And that's a great way to help people who are homeless because you're not buying another pint of vodka, you're helping them really get the help they really want. It's a way of efficiently giving assistance to people. The third way of churches help people who are poor is diving headfirst into the politics of the matter, and it's working on justice. The argument goes, if you set up your food lines and you set up your food pantries and you help people who come in, but you don't deal with why they're needing help, then you're just perpetuating a culture in which people have to go and ask for help. And we're not dealing with the fundamental issues that are creating people as poor. So we see increasingly churches speaking out on issues of justice. The best examples are historic. The black churches and the civil rights work of Dr. Martin Luther King rallied around the issue of justice because they knew they were all in it. It was about them, and they had to organize politically so that government would listen to them and change discriminatory laws. King was making the next step in that from simple civil rights to economic rights, and that's what he was doing in Memphis when he was assassinated. The key was to then bring democracy to the economic system, and that was his campaign at that time. The second area that churches were really active in economic issues and anti-poverty issues in the political sphere was in union organizing. And the best example in this country would be Pentecostal churches in the Appalachian Mountains back in the 30s. Churches generally, Protestant churches, generally have an allergy to helping organize unions. I say that in a church where 20% of the people have been members of unions at one point or time or another. But we got people, if you went back 40 years, people would have broken out in hives at the idea that we would support a unionization effort. But in the coal fields, that was the essential place, because there you had leaders who were trained in public speaking, and you had small churches that couldn't be shut down by the coal miners. They were actively working in the area of justice. We've got traditions of nonpartisanship and being non-political, and I know I've horrified someone. But if we don't deal with the whys people are suffering, we're going to continue to deal with the what do we do now questions. The fourth strategy looks to Jesus and expands upon what he teaches us, which is to love our neighbors. That can, of course, include conversion, it can include empowerment, it can include all the strategies we've talked about. But it also includes making the church a place of healing, where people can come together and pour out their hearts and be supported. The support group that we're starting in February is an example of this, where people can come here and get the support they need as they deal with the struggles of their lives. We work to love our neighbors with empowerment. Anyone can have a crisis in your life, but a crisis that destroys you teaches you that you're a victim and that nothing can get better and that there's nothing you can do. We teach forgiveness of what we have done that is wrong and reconciliation for better lives ahead. So our church was the champion of public education so that everyone would learn how to read. Our soup kettles serve a wide variety of people, but a large number of them would be classified as working poor. By providing food for people, we help them stay in their homes and give them that margin of help that prevents a problem turning into a crisis. We're especially interested in programs like PADS that focus their work on helping people develop a personal skills to avoid homelessness. There's lots of approaches in a ministry of empowerment to people, and it really goes far afield. Let me give you one example. Broadway United Methodist Church in Indianapolis was in a black neighborhood. It was a mostly white church, and they were wondering, why does no one from the neighborhood come here on Sunday mornings for worship? People came all the time for the food pantry and the clothes closet and the soup kitchen that they had, but they wouldn't come on Sunday mornings. So they hired a community organizer who went around and interviewed people and asked them, so why don't you go to church there? And people said, well, we go there because that's where we go to beg. And we feel that big when we go into that building because it's always to get something for free. And so the church moved the food pantry and the clothes closet and the soup kitchen to other properties outside. And they used their space for rent-free office space so people could have office startup businesses. And they tried to see what was going to happen. And people from the community started to come to worship there. They even threw the Girl Scouts out. I don't know what's up with that. That would seem to be a bit overboard. But there's a theory of community organizing which holds this is what you've got to do, and if people come and they want help from you and you think they can help themselves, you say no. You let them go. And that's, yeah, it doesn't feel terribly comfortable. But for Broadway, it worked. And we work to love our neighbors with hope. One of the people that I would work with occasionally for the seminary in Chicago was Jesse Jackson. And I was with Jackson when he was going out and speaking in some particular issues. And I heard the refrain that he was lifting up in the community. He was talking about how the need was to keep hope alive. That when you're in a poor community and you've just been whacked another time, someone's been killed, you've lost your jobs, there's no hope. It's that sense of hope that if we hang together and work together, that we can make things better, that becomes absolutely foundational. So he would go around and give the same message over and over again. Keep hope alive, keep hope alive. It was that theme that he accidentally stumbled upon when he was running for president that suddenly ignited support amongst white farmers in Iowa. And suddenly his candidacy, which had no hope from the very beginning, suddenly took off. And he ended up with a substantial share of the American electorate, not because of who he was, but because of this need for hope covers a wide spectrum in American life. The ability to pick yourself up after you've been knocked to the ground is something that is desperately needed by all of us, but especially people who suffer and are trapped in poverty. I began this sermon by noting in its writing how it started and stopped several times, and there were different perspectives. And even in just laying them out, I didn't change anyone's mind on that. But the starting and stop and then restarting again is a good metaphor for how this church deals with issues of poverty and elgin in our communities. which is to try something, see if it works, move on to something else if it doesn't. But keep at it. Keep at it because the problems are complex and they're difficult, and it requires us to keep engaged because that's what love does. That's how we live love. Amen.